Okay. So, my first question is about your new album.
Yes, yeah.
How it's related to the previous one?
So again,
How it is related to the previous one, to Hand Cannot Erase?
it's songs that were written at the same time, but that didn't really fit conceptually with the theme of Hand Cannot Erase. So to me, they feel like they're part of the same kind of approach and style, but the lyrics aren't necessarily connected to the same. Some of them are, but I would say they're more disconnected conceptually. But musically, they feel like they're part of the same world for me.
I would like just to ask about the lyrics. Who
Yeah.
the characters who appear in new songs?
Yes. Who is she?
Yes.
She's a model. I mean, I work with a fantastic photographer called Lasse Hoyle, and Lasse did all the artwork for the.
Sorry, I'm sorry for my English. The question is about the characters of the lyrics in the new songs.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, I thought you were talking about the model that's in the artwork.
No, it's
okay.
About one of regrets and
Yes,
happiness
Okay,
tree.
I understand. So you're talking about the original inspiration for the character in Hand Cannot Erase.
Yes.
There was a story in the UK around 2004, 2005.
Sorry. No, sir. I know. I asked about the personage of new songs, of Paul and Hal. What is the character for the song Happiness Tree, for example?
Oh, okay. What the character? Okay, I see. Sorry, I was misunderstanding. That's all right. You mean what's the?
Is it connected with the universe of Hand Cannot Erase?
Oh, I see. Okay. Now I understand. I think there's a sense that all of the songs I write are connected anyway, because I have certain subjects that I come back to time and time again. Things that fascinate me, and I think one of the things that I find very fascinating is about the modern world is this sense of isolation, that things like social networking, that things like technology, that things like just general fear and confusion of the modern world creates in people. So songs like Happiness 3, not directly related to Hand Cannot Erase, but actually the subject matter is connected. It's a song about living in the city, it's a song about modern life, it's a song about loneliness and a sense of disconnection from technology, from the world that we live in, from other people, from yourself. So these things are I would say they're kind of constants in all of my songs, or not all of them, but almost all of the songs. So in that sense, there is a connection to Hand Cannot Erase, but it's a much, shall we say, fairly loose one.
During this tour, you perform some Porcupine Tree songs. So my question is how you select the song for the tour.
Okay, I don't perform any Porcupine Tree songs. I perform Steven Wilson songs. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, some old songs.
Yeah, I mean, there is no such thing as a Porcupine Tree song. There are songs that I wrote that Porcupine Tree originally recorded, but they existed obviously before that as my songs. So how do I choose them? Pure whim, really. I mean, there are certain songs that I am very proud of, and there are certain songs that I'm not very proud of. So of course I gravitate towards the ones that I'm very proud of, and they're not necessarily always the ones that the fans are the most passionate about, but they're the ones that I'm passionate about. So there's a couple of songs in the show tonight that are amongst my favourites that I think the fans might be surprised that I'm playing, because they're not the hits, not that I have hits, but they're not the most high profile songs. But they're ones that I was always, as the creator, was very proud of. So how do I choose them? They're the ones I like, and maybe also I feel that they're ones that didn't get played enough in the past. There's one song I do called "Don't Hate Me," which it's always been one of my favourites, and Porcupine Tree never played it very much because the other guys in the band didn't feel that strongly about it, but I always was very proud of it. So being a solo artist now, it's almost like, okay, well I always thought that was a great song. I want to give it another moment in the sunlight.
I would like to ask especially about the song Sleep Together.
Yes.
If I understand, it's connected to this story about Heaven Gate sect, yes?
Sleep Together. Oh God, I have to think now. No.
No?
No.
By lyrics.
You're thinking of, there is a song about the Heaven's Gate cult, it's called Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth.
Yes, but I always think it's about the same... No, it's not connection?
No, Sleep Together was one of the songs that was inspired by a book by Bret Easton Ellis called Luna Park. And this book is about a very dysfunctional relationship between a father and a son.
I know the book, yes.
You know the book. And it's also a book about escape. It's about disappearance, it's about escape. That album was all about, in many ways, it's kind of the precursor to Hand Cannot Erase, because it's a song about dysfunction, it's a song about the modern world, it's a song about disconnection, but specifically with relation to young kids. And Sleep Together was a song about escape, and it was very much related to that book, as everything on that record was related to that book.
I would like to ask about the storyline of Hand Cannot Erase.
Yeah.
It's related by the story because maybe the main character is being abducted by aliens. So you use the alien characters in posters. You mentioned it, Maria Celeste in the blog. Can you talk a little bit about this line, about this story?
Well, that side of things, the slightly sci-fi aspect, is very subtle, and I wonder if people would have even noticed it at all if I hadn't sort of mentioned it myself. It's very subtle. Because the thing is that the way the character really communicates her story is through diary and through blog. And if you think about it, how else, if you have a character that's completely isolated from all other human life, how do you tell that story? And the only way to tell that story is through some kind of inner dialogue, and obviously through her writing in her blog and writing in her diary. But the thing is, of course, then you have to ask yourself, what is real and what is her fantasy? What is her imagination? What is her dreams? What is reality? So the sci-fi aspect for me is ambiguous. Because she talks about being visited by, these men, what effectively are men in black, She talks about being visited by these people. She talks about women that have disappeared. The implication is there that maybe these women didn't disappear, that they were taken, or they went voluntarily to another place. But at the same time, you can't really be sure, you can't really be confident that what she's saying isn't some extraordinary fantasy. Or some, psychotic, kind of like fiction. And I like that ambiguity. I like the fact that actually you're not sure whether this woman actually did just die completely alone, or whether she did go to this fantastic, other place, other planet, other reality, other dimension.
I really like this dimension of story.
I like that too, but I like also the fact that you kind of can't be quite sure if it's real or it's in her fantasy. Yeah.
What is your source of inspiration in literature? Do you like the lyrics by another rock musician? It's poetry, it's fiction. What it is for you?
I think the thing about writing lyrics is that it's difficult sometimes to find the right balance between something that works musically, by which I mean something that works in the service to the song, and something which actually reads nicely off the page too. And actually very often the greatest rock lyrics, if you actually read them off the page, they're really banal, and they're kind of silly, But there's something about, if you read like Marvin Gaye lyrics, for example, it's baby, 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 all this stuff. But it's beautiful when he sings it in the context of the song. And I think it's a very rare thing when you have lyrics to pop songs which also can read well off the page as poetry. I think, you know, you talk about Bob Dylan, you know, Joni Mitchell. There's not many I can think of off the top of my head that I would actually read the lyrics, you know. Maybe Roger Waters, but they're very...
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison, really? Oh yeah, I guess, yeah. Celebration of the Lizard, all that. Yeah, they are few and far between. I try to make my lyrics as good as I can, but I'm also sometimes finding that I write something that I think is really beautiful, and then I go to sing it, and it sounds ridiculous, because it's too verbose, it's too wordy, it's too intellectual. So I end up simplifying it and making it more like a pop song lyric, you know. So I think it's a very rare thing to find lyrics that I would want to read as poetry, and I'm not sure that's the point. That's not really the point of pop lyrics, is it?
What for you complete your work? Is a studio album or it's a live performance?
I like the fact that the seasons change. I can't pick one over the other. I like the fact that I spend, let's just say there is this kind of season cycle going on. I spend, say, 6 months in complete isolation, just with a guitar and a piano, trying to write something. Then at the end of that 6 months I've written something, I take it to my band, and I spend the next 6 months with 5 or 6 other people making this record. I finish that. I then spend the next 6 months promoting the record. So I'm doing things like this every day. I'm meeting different people every day, talking to different people about the subject. And then after that's finished, suddenly I'm spending the evening with thousands of people every night. And then I go right back to the beginning of the cycle, and I'm completely isolated again. I like that fact that my life is this kind of cycle of seasons and experience. I don't think I would want to be in the studio the whole time. I wouldn't want to be on the road the whole time. So I'm very lucky that there is this constant rotating of experience in a way.
I'm going to release a concert DVD for Henk Notarized.
I don't know is the answer. I'm not a big fan of concert DVDs. I never watch them. I think if you want to see the show, come and see the show. You know, there's nothing really to compete with being in the room, with the vibe, the atmosphere of being at a live show. Now I have screens, I have quadraphonic sound, I have all this stuff. I'm thinking, can I really put that across in a live DVD? And I understand the argument for live DVD, which is that not everyone can see the show. There might be people living in Iran that will never get to see the show, or or wherever, that will never have the opportunity to see the show. And I also understand the argument that the DVD will be around for years to come when I'm no longer touring, when I'm dead, the DVD. But at the same time, I'm struggling to motivate myself. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. To record, to edit, to mix, all that stuff. It's a lot of work. I'm not massively enthusiastic about it. At this stage, I'm still touring the show, and I'm touring a lot. I'm touring right through this year. So I'm just saying to everyone, please come and see the show, Don't wait for this live DVD. Come and see it, because there's no substitute for actually seeing the show.
You often talk about that you would like to make a soundtrack for the movie.
Yes.
What kind of movie?
Something weird, something fucked up, something surreal. Something interesting. My favourite directors, people like Jonathan Glazer, David Lynch, those kind of people who make very smart, strange, surreal films that are actually very poetic and very beautiful, which is how I kind of feel about my music. It's very melancholic, but it has a kind of poetic. It has the poetry of melancholy about it. And I grew up loving cinema as much as I love music. So I grew up seeing the films of Stanley Kubrick, David Lynch, Tarkovsky, a Russian director. Those kind of movies for me were always the ones that inspired me. So I would love to do, I don't want to do like a Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. Something beautiful.
I want to do something, strange with perhaps a European sensibility to it. Poetic, beautiful, strange, fucked up. I don't know. I don't know until I see, until I have the opportunity. But I mean, for example, I would love to have done the soundtrack to a movie like Under the Skin. The soundtrack is fantastic anyway. But that's the kind of movie. If an opportunity like that came along to score a movie like that, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Do you never think to do to write a soundtrack for the silent movie? Like Art Zoid for Nosferatu, for example?
Well, I mean, I've never been invited. Possibly, yeah. I mean, I could. I could.
Realistic movie, something.
Yeah, or do
silent movie.
Or do a new soundtrack for one of those old Buñuel movies, like L'Âge d'Or or Un Chien de Loup. That would be interesting. But the thing is that those kind of projects are always going to be very small niche things. With the best will in the world, I don't know how many people actually got to see Art Zoid's new soundtrack to Nosferatu, but I'm thinking not very many, and and I'd like to do something that would be a little bit more high profile than that, But I mean, I certainly wouldn't. I mean, it's as a project, it's definitely an interesting project, yeah.
I admire your playlist in internet,
Right.
and I would like to ask, how do you listen the music? Do you go to the live show? Do you listen at home while you're traveling, while you're walking in car?
All of those things. The only thing I don't really do is I don't really go to live shows. Partly because when I go home, I really just want to get away from. I mean, being on tour is like going to a live show every single day of your life. So when you get home, I kind of just want to stay home with my little doggy, So, but I listen to music. It's funny, people say to me, what do you do when you're not making music? And the answer is I listen to music. And I watch movies, and I'm still very curious about new music, as you can tell from the playlist. I'm still discovering, exploring, not just music of the present, but also music of the past that I have yet to discover, and there seems to be always something else. Just when you think you've heard everything from the past, you realise there's this artist you knew nothing about, and they've got this massive back catalogue, and that's wonderful. Isn't that wonderful? That suddenly you realise there's this whole world of music that you have yet to discover that's always been there. It's always been there, but you've only just found it. And I'm still finding that. And so the answer to your question, I have about 3 different hi-fi systems at home. I have 3 vinyl turntables. I have CD players in every room. And I have a big collection of records, CDs, and Blu-rays, DVDs. And I listen in the car. I listen when I'm walking around town. I listen at home. I listen when I'm falling asleep. I listen when I'm waking up. I still fill my world with sound, and I'm showing no signs of losing interest in that.
Did you have a Walkman when you were a teenager?
I must have done. I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. I don't remember if I did or not, but I'm sure I did. Yes. Yeah.
First dates, you don't remember?
I don't remember. I remember all sorts of things from my childhood. Technology, cassette decks, record players, Walkman. I don't think. Maybe I didn't have a Walkman. No, maybe I didn't. I honestly I can't picture in my mind my Walkman. So maybe I didn't have one. No.
Okay. I read recently one old interview by David Bowie. It's the interview of 70, And he said very interesting thing. He said that for him, he was in USA in this moment, and he said in the USA music is a communicative medium, and England is just something to listen, just entertainment. What is the music for you now? Is it the art object? Is it something self-contained, or it's some way of life, way of communication? What is for you now?
That's a very complicated, question to answer. I mean, there's no doubt that the significance of music in people's lives has changed a lot since the days of David Bowie in the 70s. I think in the 70s, in the 80s, and even to an extent going into the 90s, pop music was still something that young people would use to define their personality as something very distinct from the personality of their parents. Now, if you think we all grow up and we're all kind of like our parents until a certain point, and we get to about 12 or 13 or whatever, and at that point we almost want to rebel against whatever our upbringing was. And one of the main vehicles for doing that for several decades was pop music. Whether you decided you were going to be a punk or a metal kid or a grunge kid or a DJ or whatever it was kind of a way of rebelling against your upbringing and your parents and your family. And I think that was a very important role that pop music played, none more so than David Bowie. It's almost impossible to read an autobiography of any musician that emerged any time after 1980 that doesn't say seeing David Bowie on Top of the Pops in 1972 or 1971 or whatever wasn't a life-changing moment for them. Anyone, if it's Ian Curtis or the guys from Duran Duran or Viv Albertine, whoever it is, they will say seeing David Bowie on Top of the Pops in the early 10s was a life-changing moment. Is that still possible today? I don't think so. I don't think pop music has the power anymore to shock or surprise or really influence the way young people or old people think, dress, interface with the world. And there's no doubt in my mind that for many years it did. 60s, the Beatles, Elvis in the 50s, the Beatles in the 60s, Bowie in the 70s. These are people that changed the way people thought, lived their lives, dressed. It's the sexual revolution, the way people thought about gay people. These are massive sort of seismic changes in personal and global politics brought about by people like John Lennon, Paul McCartney and David Bowie. And even I think in the early 90s you had people like Kurt Cobain as a kind of symbol of the grunge movement that was changing fashion, cinema. You had the new generation of slacker cinema, which came out of grunge, people like Harmony Korine. Even politicians were referencing, is that ever going to happen again? I can't see it. I can't see it. I think we now live in the digital world where these things will always be more important to kids than any pop song. And I'm afraid to say that means probably that pop and rock music has become more marginalised. It's more of a struggle now, I think, particularly to be an artist that is trying to do something that's not necessarily generic, formulaic pop. Obviously my music is not mainstream music, but I do believe that if I'd been operating in the 70s, the 80s even, I probably would have reached a bigger audience than I have, simply because there isn't any more the opportunity for this kind of music to exist in the mainstream. And I think people like Bowie were lucky in a way that they were making their music at a time when there was an incredible appetite for new ideas, new experiences, new sounds, whether it was music or cinema. And I think those days have probably gone forever, which is kind of depressing in a way, but I think it was also inevitable. It was also inevitable that that day would come when there's nothing really new left that we can do as rock musicians. We've heard it all, you know, everything's been done in a way, you know. So all you can do is keep doing what other people have done, but try and do it with enough personality that it still somehow seems fresh. And that's what I do. I'm not claiming what I do is particularly innovative. I'm definitely using an established musical vocabulary that's been established for over the last 50 years, but I think I'm doing it in a way that sounds only like me. I hope so, you know. So I think that's all that you know, contemporary rock musicians or pop musicians can really aspire to now. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a very big subject, you know. But
yes, but
yeah.
it's interesting to talk about.
It's such a big subject, you know, the whole history of rock and pop, but I think Bowie was speaking there from a very privileged perspective of operating in the 70s, you know, because that was the time, really.
Mm-hmm.
The 60s, that was the explosion of ideas and creativity, and people wanted their artists to be different, and they wanted their artists to be experimental. Now people don't. They want the opposite. They want their artists to all be very comfy, you know, sound very familiar, nothing too difficult, you know, just give us nice, pleasant pop songs, you know, Ed Sheeran and, you know, all these, I don't know if you know these artists we have in the UK, very boring, Coldplay, you know, those kind of things. But that's what people want. Just pleasantly, something they can put on in the background while they're having a dinner party. But that's not the 70s. For me, that's not the way I think the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s, you know, even the 90s, you know. If you think of all the incredible electronic music that came out in the 90s, and that for me was the last golden age of, you know, I think of artists like Aphex Twin, Massive Attack, Portishead, Boards of Canada, Square Pusher. That's a really exciting time musically, but that's 20 years ago. That's 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it's just gone like that. And nothing really has, to my mind, has been really that surprising ever since.
You talk about the connection between rock music and self-identification and some subculture identification. Do you ever sympathize for any subculture when you have 20 or 16?
Of course, yeah. No, I mean, the first music I ever got into when I was like 13 was the new wave of British heavy metal. Because I was about 12 then, and it was all bands like Maiden, Saxon, Diamond Head, all these bands coming through. And I was totally a little metal kid, you know. I think that's probably the only time, because very soon after that I kind of discovered the music of the 70s, and I was discovering things like krautrock, and I was discovering things like, you know, even like really early electronic music by people like Stockhausen and Berio, and so I was very precociously, you know, discovering all this stuff. So the idea of being part of a tribe didn't make a lot of sense, you know, to me. I think at that point I just became a student of music and the history of music. But very briefly I was, a little headbanger.
Also, you often talk about nostalgia, and I think the musical preference, it's very connected with the nostalgia. So what music for you is something, what music do you like because it's everlasting value, and what music do you like just because it's also 60 or so 70?
Well, okay. That's a very complex question to answer, because there's many nuances to that. I mean, there is a sound I love that is the old sound, and it's not something that can even be recreated. If I listen to an old, if I listen to a record made in 1970, there is a sound, there is a kind of a patina to the quality of the sound. And it may be that the music is actually kind of third rate, not very good. But there, it could be like a sort of a really not very good jazz rock band, or a very average progressive rock band, or a actually not particularly good krautrock band. But something about the sound and the atmosphere of the times permeates the music, and actually I enjoy it. Whereas if I was listening to the equivalent of a 2016 band, it would be repulsive to me, But something about that era kind of permeates the sound of these records. If that's the kind of nostalgia you're talking about. But then, of course, there's other forms of nostalgia, which is like there's music that has an inherent sense of nostalgia about it. For example, Nick Drake's music, I think, feels, whenever you hear it, and whoever hears it, it has a sense of nostalgia about it. It takes you back, or it has a kind of golden quality to it. And then, of course, the third thing is there's music that is nostalgic to you because you connect it with certain things in your childhood. And again, I have music like that. There are records, again, I love that I know are terrible. But we all do, don't we? We all have that. I'm sure you have that too. There are records are terrible, and they're very cheesy and very corny, but they have a special meaning to you because of a time you remember, loving them when you were a kid, or an old girlfriend I might associate a song with, or I might associate something with my father, who's now passed away. So there's that form of nostalgia too. And so in a sense, yes, I think they're all very special to me. All three of those forms of nostalgia have a very strong, probably influence as well on my own work. Yeah. There's a lot of nostalgia in my songs.
What do you think? What music will make you nostalgic in 20 years? What is the music that sound so 2000? Sorry.
Of this time.
Of this time.
That's a good question. I think one of the things I find is as I get older, it's harder for me to connect with the music I discover than it was when I was 15 or even 25. There were certain records I would hear when I was younger that are deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained in me. Now the thing is, I can hear a new record today and I can be completely blown away with it. I can think it's an amazing, amazing, amazing record. But for whatever reason, it won't quite ingrain itself as deeply in me as the records I heard when I was 15 or 25. And I think as you get older, I suppose it's partly because the older you get, the more you've heard and the more has already gone in there, and there's only so much that can go in there, The records I discovered when I was like just starting to get into music, I will always have nostalgia for them. And if you play them to me now, I could sing you every single word. I know every single twist and turn in the music, every melody, every little detail of the music. I know it because when I was a kid, I could only afford to buy one record a month, with my pocket money. So every record I bought, I would listen to it relentlessly over and over and over and over again. And now, of course, I can afford to buy 10 albums a week, so I do, So I end up listening to them maybe once or twice, and I like them, but by that time I've kind of moved on to the next thing, So I don't. The answer to your question, I think, is I don't think I will have the same nostalgic attachment to anything that I'm listening to now that I do for the music I was listening to 20 or 30 years ago. And that has nothing to do with the quality of the music. That's simply to do with me, yeah.
What do you think if your music be nostalgic for all the generation of?
Well, I know it is, and I understand that process. That one of the things that you have to get used to as an artist is that you might always think that what you're doing now is the best thing you've ever done, which I do. I always think what I've done is the best thing I've ever done. But the fans will always have a different perspective, and to them, their love of your music is very bound up with what you're talking about, that idea of nostalgia. So usually I find that fans think the best album, or one of the most important albums to them, is usually the one they discovered you with. It's almost like that's the door they found, and they walked through that door, and nothing you do really after that will ever quite match up to that for them. And I understand that, I do understand that, even though I think, yeah, but my new album's so much better than that. But it's all to do, as pop music should be about this, it's all to do with, it's all bound up with people's personal experience, personal lives, where they were at that time when they heard that song, what that song meant to them at that time. And that's something very beautiful, and something you can never really quantify or recreate. And it's one of the things about being a fan, and I find this too, as a fan of music, that in a way you're always looking to get that feeling again. And that's why you keep buying records by an artist. Sometimes you keep buying records by an artist even though you kind of not really enjoying them anyway. You keep, because you're looking for that that thrill you got when you discovered that record. And so this is all bound up with nostalgia, and it's one of the difficult things about being an artist like myself, or a musician like myself, is there is the pressure always to play songs that have no meaning to you. You might not even like them. I mean, some of my songs that fans love, I don't even like them. I'm like, embarrassed by some of them. Not embarrassed, but like, I'm not so proud of them. There is that, why don't you play this song and that song? Because I'd rather move forward is the simple answer, And the songs I do play from my past, like I said to you at the beginning of our conversation, are not necessarily the obvious ones. I do one called Lazarus, which is kind of a popular song, but other than that, I kind of avoid a lot of the more popular ones and the ones that people have nostalgia for. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of artist. I'm not about nostalgia. If you want nostalgia, go and see a Pink Floyd tribute band, or or a Beatles tribute band. And that's not me. So there is that kind of nostalgia which is surrounds anyone that's been making music, as I have for more than 20 years now. That will always be present.
My last question: what do you think? Do your music reflect the spirit of the time? Is it something that is the music of 2000?
Well, I think inevitably it must do. Whether I'm conscious of it or not, whether I mean it to or not, I am someone living in 2016. And if you look at an album like Hand Cannot Erase, there are many elements of that people could say, oh, that's influenced by the 70s or the 60s or the 80s. But ultimately, if you listen to that record and you read the lyrics, you understand that this album could only have existed now. Because this is an album about the world we live in. And it's about technology, it's about the internet, it's about social networking, it's about isolation, it's about all the modern malaises of fear and confusion in the face of terrorism and paedophiles and all this stuff. It's all in there. It might not be explicitly in there, but it is in there. And I think that, in a sense, is something that will very firmly date it to this age that we live in now. You said the spirit of 2016. Yes, absolutely. I think that would be the case whether I meant it to be or not. I think all music must be, something of it is always of the spirit of the time it's made in. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.